Welcome to this week's edition of Political Update here on Atlanta News First. I'm Tim Darnell, joined by our outstanding digital and broadcast on-air political reporter Doug Reardon. And Doug, starting off our wrap-up for this week is a bit of sad news that was announced just yesterday, and a story that we not only covered on AtlantaNewsFirst.com, but you covered in our broadcast segments the recent announcement from the Carter Center that former First Lady Rosalynn Carter is experiencing dementia. We all know that her husband, Jimmy Carter, the nation's 35th president, or 39th president of the United States, has entered hospice care and has been in hospice care for some months. And now we're faced with this sad news that the former First Lady is experiencing dementia.
Yeah, it's a real shame because her whole life had advocated for mental health care for families in America well before people were talking about this, and when it was still relatively taboo. But yeah, while dementia itself isn't a mental health issue, it is a cognitive issue. This is a diagnosis that 1 in 10 older Americans, including 1/3 of Americans in their 90s, are going to get at some point in their lifetime. And yeah, sad news that the 95-year-old former First Lady has been diagnosed with dementia. That statement from the Carter Center noted that they are both in their hometown of Plains, where the former president is undergoing his hospice care. They're surrounded by family and friends. And yeah, all the way from her time in the State House here in Georgia to the White House and then back at the Rosalynn Carter Institute and the Carter Center, she has been a staunch advocate for people with mental health issues, families trying to talk about this. And really, that was part of the reason why the Carter Center wanted to make this diagnosis so very public, was so that they can spark conversations in other households around the country today, yesterday, and going forward about taking care of their own mental health. If anyone's interested, by the way, there is a message board up at cartercenter.org where you can leave the former First family some well wishes, because we certainly know that they are going through a lot right now, Tim.
They certainly are. Former President Jimmy Carter, former First Lady Rosalynn Carter live in their hometown, the southwest Georgia community of Plains, and kind of staying in that same general region, returning more to politics. Next weekend is when the Georgia State Republican Convention will be held in Columbus. The following weekend, we know that former President Donald Trump will be headlining the event Saturday night. We're also learning today that former Arizona gubernatorial candidate Kari Lake will be headlining the event on Friday. Other possible White House contenders, former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson is attending, as is former Georgia U.S. Senator Kelly Loeffler, Marjorie Taylor Greene from Northwest Georgia, Congresswoman Andrew Clyde, also a Northeast Georgia congressman, and Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones coming, where really this is going to be the first major appearance for former President Trump on a national platform since he announced his re-election campaign late last year.
Right. Well, some big names that you mentioned there, Tim, but there are a couple names that you didn't mention, and I find that just as interesting, right? Attorney General Chris Carr and Governor Brian Kemp will not be attending this convention June 9th at the Columbus Convention and Trade Center, and that's a big deal. I mean, Kemp has been very outspoken about wanting the party to move away from former President Donald Trump and his influence. He has gone on national television. He has told us that that is something that he wishes for the party, and again, he will not be attending this event. But you did say, and it's worth noting, that this is the former president's first stop in Georgia since launching his campaign for his second term as president, and he'll have to do it in the shadow of this Fulton County District Attorney investigation that is hanging over his head, one of many legal issues that he's facing, and the only one here in Georgia, but it has to do with his alleged activity in trying to meddle with the results back in 2020. He lost the state to Joe Biden by just over 11,000, actually a little under 12,000 votes, and it all has to do with that phone call where he had asked our Secretary of State to find him the votes that he would have needed to win. And so we know that an indictment, if it happens, could come sometime this summer over that 2020 mess here in Georgia. And Fani Willis has really taken her time on this, and so this will be his first trip to Georgia as a official candidate in the 2024 election, and again, that'll be hanging over his head. but we'll see what he says. I mean, this, also the GOP here in Georgia is in a bit of turmoil itself because David Schaefer, who is the chair of the party, could also face an indictment in that Fulton County DA investigation. We know he was one of the false electors that they were looking at as far as if they had done anything wrong in their attempts to try and overturn the election results as well. So this is an interesting moment for the GOP party here in Georgia, and I think it'll really be on the president and some of those other speakers that you mentioned who are big names in the party to set the tone for how 2024 is going to go here in the state, and very important one at that.
Very important one, and Georgia will obviously play a huge central role in selecting who the next occupant of the White House is.
Yeah.
Turning our attention to the current occupant, that being Democratic President Joe Biden, he and GOP House Speaker Kevin McCarthy are in their final efforts to secure a vote happening tonight, Wednesday, the evening of Wednesday, May 31st, anticipating that the vote will happen later tonight on Capitol Hill that could possibly raise the debt ceiling of the United States. This has been an ongoing negotiation between the White House and the very small GOP majority on Capitol Hill, and we may see a vote later this evening.
Yeah, it certainly could happen. I mean, I know with these things, it always comes down to the wire, right? It's always panic, 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 and then we have a deal. But this is certainly different given that we have an opposing majority in the House and a very staunch opposition as well from the ultra-conservative wing of the party. We'll talk about that more in just a second. But, as far as the impacts, this could be wildly detrimental to the nation's ability to borrow money from other nations. It could also damage the nation's credit reporting. I know that Fitch, who is one of the larger credit reporting companies in the nation and in the world, has said that for the first time ever, they could downgrade the country's perfect credit score rating, which again would raise interest rates. It could really impact people's ability to get their Social Security, get their Medicaid payments, Medicare payments, excuse me. But again, it is there are a couple things that I think were not non-starters for both the president and for Republicans, and that was hopefully Social Security, but also defense and veteran spending. Those I don't think are things that will be touched no matter what happens with this vote tonight or potential vote tonight. But like we said, Tim, it's that ultra-conservative wing of the Republican Party in the House that is kind of putting their foot down on this and holding things up. And I know that faction includes some members from Georgia as well.
It does indeed, and it's interesting you bring that up. We're looking at following the votes on Capitol Hill in terms of which Republicans will support the current plan negotiated between the White House and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy to raise the national debt ceiling of the United States. Recently had a conversation with Fred McGrath, who is the president and CEO of the Institute for Legislative Analysis. Now, his organization recently released a report of the most limited government members of Congress. Four of those, actually three I should say, landed in the top 50, including Marjorie Taylor Greene from Georgia's 14th District, Andrew Clyde from the 10th, and Barry Loudermilk from Metro Atlanta's 8th District, I believe. Here is that conversation with Fred McGrath. A national debt ceiling arrangement, the deal that was negotiated this past weekend between President Joe Biden and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, is getting a lot of focus and attention this week, with a vote scheduled this week to whether or not the House will pass or approve the arrangement. And in this week's featured interview on Atlanta News First Political Update, we're happy to be joined by Fred McGrath. He is the president and CEO of the Institute for Legislative Analysis. And Fred, one of the reasons that we wanted to reach out to you today is that Congressman Andrew Clyde, who represents a small portion of Metro Atlanta and also Northeast Georgia, here in the Peach State, recently came in and ranked as number 29 of the most conservative congressional representatives by your organization, the Institute for Legislative Analysis Limited Government Index. Now, Georgia has a number of other pretty highly ranked congressional representatives. Tell us how these rankings came about and tell us what your organization is all about.
Yes, well, thanks for having me, Tim. So we actually just launched the Institute for Legislative Analysis a couple months ago. And our goal is to educate the general public on how their lawmakers stand on all the key issues. So basically serve as a transparency tool. And we do that through scorecards. The team we have here at the Institute for Legislative Analysis, we previously did a lot of work at the American Conservative Union, constructing the first 50 state scorecard. So we're now kind of bringing that to a number of other organizations, serving as a platform for different groups to better evaluate their elected officials. And what we've done is our limited government index. This is kind of our gold standard tool that's used to go and conduct the analysis. We go and look at every single vote that was cast in Congress. And basically what we do in our sampling is try to find the bills that best reflect how elected officials view government. So all members are scored on a 0 to 100 basis. A 100 score represents a lawmaker who supports a very limited role in government. So kind of going back to the vision of our founding fathers, the limited government principles of our Constitution, versus a score of a 0 on the other end is a lawmaker who views government as having a very large role in an individual's life and being involved in really all aspects of society.
Now, when you say providing a scorecard on the key issues, define those key issues.
Yeah, so we're really diving into all the policy areas that impact a everyday American's life. So we have kind of core 10 policy fields: energy, healthcare, looking at individual liberties, law, all these kind of core fields. And within those, diving down into the nitty-gritty policies that make up those issues to try to provide a overall view of how government basically impacts a person.
When you talk about healthcare, are we looking at social issues as well? Abortion, access to gender affirming or altering surgeries, all of these social issues that take up a number of headlines and a lot of media attention. Does your organization rate those congressional representatives on those issues as well?
Yeah, great question. So for those issues, the abortion, the gender, all of those things you brought up, we do not include those directly in our limited government index. Obviously, as you just highlighted, there's a lot of back and forth. People, view it's a hot button issues, obviously. But what we do is still track those votes, because as I mentioned earlier, we have partner organizations we're working with. We're helping construct scorecards for. So we still track those groups, those issues, so those groups can include it within their scorecards.
Specifically in terms of Georgia, we have Marjorie Taylor Greene from the Georgia's 10th Congressional District coming in at number 11. Andrew Clyde, who we're speaking about today, number 29. Barry Loudermilk from the 11th District, including much of Metro Atlanta, 39. What from those, those are 3 of the top 50 in the Institute's ranking. Right off the top of your head, are there any commonalities among those 3 congressional representatives that kind of tie them all together, and why is one congressional representative ranked higher than some of the others?
Yeah, so for our index, we included 122 roll call votes. And that's, if you do all the math, there's almost 40,000 individual votes that go into each of these scores. So all three of those members you mentioned, they all scored above a 90%. So they're kind of that top tier. We have two levels of awards. Our champion of limited government and our defender of limited government. So kind of a gold and silver star. So those all three members earned our gold star. If you look at their voting records, you'll see across all those policies, those 10 core areas and all the, the issues that make up those policy categories, they consistently voted for limited government. And each of them, yes, there might be a couple percentage points off, but together, as you can tell, they're very strong advocates for limited government.
In terms of limited government, and we're talking about the debt ceiling, something that has been dominating headlines for a couple of weeks. What is your opinion on the package that was negotiated between the White House and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy? Give me some predictions as far as whether or not this is going to pass, whether your organization gives it a thumbs up or a thumbs down.
Yeah, so we are a transparency organization. So we don't do advocacy. So kind of when we're looking at bills, we wait for all the dust to settle, all the details and stuff to come out. Now, I haven't seen the bill. I've heard, just being in Washington, there's, a lot of opinions on it. A number of the real conservative members who have scored very highly in our rankings, have some concerns. But, also, that Speaker McCarthy is in a tough spot and a leadership position. And, even if you look at Democrats on the far kind of progressive wing, they're not happy with it. So I think hopefully over these next, few days, things will start to become a little bit more clear. We actually get all the details and, hopefully something can get done here before the 5th or when that ceiling, the drop dead timeline comes.
We're talking with Fred McGrath, who is the president and CEO of the Institute for Legislative Analysis. Now, this organization was formed, according to the information that has been sent out, by former members of the American Conservative Union, which puts on the Conservative Political Action Conference, CPAC, which is just a must-attend event for Republicans and conservatives seeking public office. Tell us how this institute actually was formed.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, ACU, they've been scoring members of Congress since 1971. A tremendous history. And of course, the CPAC event draws, a huge number of activists from all across the country. So with their scorecard, we've seen the success, have a number of members on our team work there for almost a decade. We wanted to bring the technology, the know-how of constructing these scorecards to more conservative and liberty-minded organizations. So that together you'll have more groups helping educate the public and connecting with the grassroots. So it's kind of the Institute for Legislative Analysis is sort of an expansion and bringing the success of the scorecards to all across the DC and the states.
In terms of the overall conservatism, Georgia has a majority Republican congressional delegation. We do have 2 Democratic U.S. senators. Georgia is seen as a battleground state, as something that, Joe Biden became the first Democrat since Bill Clinton in 1992 to win Georgia. Georgia was the only Deep South state that President Biden won several years ago when he was running for president, and yet we do have a majority Republican congressional delegation, 100% Republican-controlled state constitutional offices. And, 3 of the top 50 most conservative members of Congress. From your standpoint, from a macro standpoint, do you think Georgia is indeed a battleground state, or do you believe that it will continue to be majority conservative?
Yeah, so what we did with our analysis when putting together the limited government index, we took all 40,000 votes across the nation cast by all 535 members of Congress and ranked all the delegations. So Georgia actually came in at 29th overall. We had Arizona was 28th and Colorado was 30th. So it's it would seem kind of right in that battleground area. The Senate, again, you have Warnock and Ossoff looking at kind of where they place. They came in on the Senate side at 63rd and 67th overall. So kind of not quite as conservative as kind of the other Democrats you immediately think of, such as the Mansions, the Cinemas, the Testers. But still a little bit more progressive than even Dianne Feinstein. So that definitely played a role in kind of pushing it to the battleground. And on the House side, as you mentioned, we had 3 members there that were, kind of our gold star, got scores of above 90%. But there are also some Democratic members that got pretty low ratings that kind of pulled it down the other side. So some of them are David Scott. He got a 5%, Rep. Johnson at a 3.8%. And Rep. Williams actually was one of the most liberal or least limited government minded at a 1.27% overall rating.
Well, we are wrapping up this edition of Political Update here on the Atlanta News First digital streaming desk, wrapping up our conversation with Frederick McGrath, President and CEO of the Institute for Legislative Analysis. Final thoughts on the debt ceiling negotiations that we're watching, final thoughts on anything we've discussed today.
Well, it's the debt is something that's on the minds of Americans all across the country, and that's really why we try to put out our publication, that limited government index, so that everyday constituents of these lawmakers can see, well, what brought us to this point? What were the big policies? What did we spend this money on? And kind of can then hold their lawmakers accountable, whether they believe that spending was made sense or is something that should be cut. So we're just more trying to provide that tool for every American, no matter where they are on the political scale, to hold their lawmakers accountable.
Following the debt ceiling and negotiations and final vote and other issues as Georgia continues to be at the forefront of the nation's political attention. Thanks for Fred McGrath, President and CEO of the Institute for Legislative Analysis. Thanks to all of you for watching this edition of Political Update here on Atlanta News First.